Anyway, let's talk NHS, shall we? Do you care whether or not Rishi Sunak uses private healthcare? He was being questioned at the weekend. He was asked that direct question. Do you have a private GP? He refused to answer, said it was all a distraction. This has divided people, Matthew, because some people are saying you can't possibly be the Prime Minister presiding over the National Health Service if you're not experiencing firsthand the problems within it. Where do you stand on it?
So I think maybe it's helpful just to set out very briefly first my own experience of healthcare, so it's all transparent, seeing as that's one of the things I may be calling for. I do not have health insurance. I've never had health insurance. I have gone private twice, I think, in my life. Once to check out my nether regions.
Oh, God, blimey. Okay,
and once because I had a minor, I mean, all cancer serious, but a minor skin cancer on my cheek, and I can't remember, the NHS wasn't being quick enough, but I wanted to get in there as quickly as I could, so I did that. And it was expensive, but I thought it was worth it. So that's me, right? Do I have anything against private healthcare in principle? Possibly not. Do I think that the Prime Minister has a responsibility to use the health service? I thought quite hard about this, and initially I thought maybe he doesn't. But then I thought, well, actually, at least for the period when he is the man in charge of, ultimately in charge of, he's not the health secretary, but he's the PM, in charge of one of our major public services, I think there's quite a strong argument to say that he should be using it. It would certainly sharpen his mind as to the crisis, because, God forbid, he ever had to go to accident and emergency at the moment, he would very possibly see chaos. And the consequence, in my view, of underinvestment, you'll say partly the result of what happened in the pandemic and policies therein. But I certainly think he should feel a responsibility to at least to level with us. Because if he doesn't, apart from anything else, it's tempting to say, well, he obviously thinks it does matter. Otherwise, he'd have given a straightforward answer to a straightforward question. The final caveat to this is, I do not think on balance that it is our business whether his family have private health insurance or use a private doctor of any sort, because I think that is private. But whether he does or doesn't, I probably think should be in the public domain.
And where do you draw the line there? So you think he should experience the NHS in order to be able to preside ultimately over it. Do you think he should have to use a food bank to be able to, comment on that? Does he have to use a night bus to be able to talk about bus routes? Like, where do you draw the line?
I certainly think he should visit food banks. I certainly think it would be helpful. Security concerns aside, let's be realistic about this. If he did use night buses from time to time, I think it's a sliding scale, isn't it? And I'm not saying that intellectually he cannot grasp the size of this problem. He'd have to be pretty stupid not to understand that the NHS is in crisis. I just think it's partly about optics. You and I and everyone else in this studio and behind the scenes, Dominique, we all, presumably, most of us at least, on our incomes, use the NHS. So if the man in charge of sorting a crisis that affects 99% of the country doesn't use it, there's a sense in which he's not in the same boat, that we're not all in this together.
I think it's very ill-advised, Dominique, because he probably didn't want to admit it, because he knows the journalists would have a field day. But actually, if truth be told, even if you've got the best private healthcare in the land, there's still a component of the NHS that you have to use, because things like A&Es, they're not equivalent in the private sector. So you'd have to end up there anyway, heaven forbid, if you had that kind of urgent need.
Yeah, I think it's bizarre that he's actually just not coming out and saying that, yeah, I use a private GP. I mean, what exactly do people expect? He's a billionaire. He's richer than a king. Do you really think that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is going to slum it out at the NHS when he doesn't have to? And really, you could make a moral argument. You could say that as someone who is extremely wealthy, why should I be clogging up space in a public health service that is currently in crisis? So the fact that he is umming and ahhing about it, I just find it extremely bizarre. And secondly, I don't understand why, people like Matthew, I don't mean this personally, but why do you want crumbs from people like Rishi Sunak, who aren't one of you? He's not a man of the people.
Yeah,
if he were to use
crumbs,
the NHS, because he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he'd likely get preferential treatment anyway. Why do people want to feel and be under the illusion that he's one of us when he's not?
Look, do you remember when Boris Johnson, it was a scare. I was not known for being a Boris Johnson fan, but like the vast majority of people in this country, right-minded people in this country, it was a very alarming moment when he was admitted to hospital with very serious COVID complications. And I think the fact that the most powerful person in the country used the same service that the vast majority of the rest of us would have used in those circumstances. And actually, if you are privately insured, you probably go to accident emergency anyway, I imagine. But the fact that he was using the NHS just showed us that, at least to some extent, we were all this in together. I think that sent a powerful message.
And then after that, we found out that he broke the very rules that he set. So again, it's all about crumbs. It's all about the illusion that we're all in this together. When Boris Johnson was in hospital, it's likely he got the best care ever, because that is the Prime Minister of this country, whether he's using the NHS or not. I think the problem in this country is that we're getting extremely comfortable with being under a spell of delusion that our politicians, most of them, actually aren't one of us. They can't really relate. They're making millions, hundreds of thousands of pounds in second jobs. I think we need to wake up and smell the coffee.
Just to quickly tackle you on that one point, I know we'll come to it later, but if you look at Labour MPs, and yeah, I'm broadly speaking on the left, again, put my cards on the table, there are 195 Labour MPs at the moment, I think, and they took home something like $1.2 million.
Is this the second job? I'm going to come to that.
OK, I was just going to say, but on average, Labour MPs, just to cut to the chase, I think in addition to what they get paid as MPs, they take home £6,000, which is a lot for some people. It's not a huge amount.
You're a bit daft. Bit daft if you're hiring the people that are not in power. You're hiring the second squad, the B-rate squad. I think that'd be.
Well, they're going to be in power. They're going to be in power in a couple of years.
I think in general, in response to the question anyway, I would just say that the fact that journalists keep hammering home with this, I think it's an insult to people's intelligence. And the fact that Rishi Sunak just won't come out and say, I'm a billionaire, I have a private GP.
His wife is a billionaire.
I'd be wasting public service time anyway, using it. I don't use it.
That's a really important question. I've been trying to find the answer to that this afternoon and have failed to do so. But I wonder whether, is it always the case that when people go private, they are taking strain off the NHS? Or is it also possible, or partly possible, that when people go private, they are dragging doctors away from the NHS who would otherwise be treating NHS patients? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's an important question.
It'll probably be a mixture of the both, but I think what goes on here, it's politics of envy. Rishi Sunak was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he'd have turned round and answered honestly, because I can only assume he's got private healthcare, because quite frankly, if you can afford to have the best care possible, I wouldn't believe someone that would look me in the eye and say, I can definitely afford private healthcare, but I'm not going to use it. Why would you not?
Well, I know doctors who could easily have made hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of pounds more by being partly or even maybe exclusively private doctors who have decided on principle that they will remain in the NHS. So I'm not sure I totally agree with you on that.
And what do we think about this whole kind of Ken Clarke suggestion? What he's suggesting earlier on today is that if you're a wealthy person, you could perhaps give, I quote, you could pay a modest fee to access the NHS. What do you think to that?
I think it's common sense, to be honest. I mean...
What, common sense that wealthy people should pay to access the NHS?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't worship the NHS as this, like, beacon of socialised utopia. I think that other European countries that operate at more of sort of a hybrid system of state subsidised, but you do have to pay a fee. I think, looking at the evidence, that does work better. And I think common sense-wise, if you can afford to pay for your own healthcare, you should. That being said, you know, middle-class families who, when you are looking in from the outside, they appear to be very well off, they will struggle with that. So I think it should be a half-and-half system, and I don't understand why it's not.
A so-called wealthy person, everyone makes me laugh, because what they basically mean when they say wealthy people, they basically mean anyone that's not me. So anyone that's got more money than me should pay. If you're a wealthy person, like whatever, we can dispute what that even means later on, but if you're a wealthy person, by definition, I would suspect that you are making a much greater taxation contribution than a less wealthy person. I don't know, the top 1% of earners in this country pay something like 28% of all income tax. So by definition, they are already paying much more than a lower earning person to access that NHS. I think it's ludicrous and quite insulting, actually, that you discriminate based on someone's income as to the access they get to the NHS.
The highest rate of tax kicks in at point A and it remains the same percentage all the way up to billions of pounds. So we have, what, 170 odd billionaires in this country collectively.
Are you about the additional rate, the 45p?
Collectively, they have 650 billion pounds. I mean, it's unthinkable, untaxed wealth that goes on in this country.
What's untaxed? What are you talking about?
Relatively untaxed. So
if you earn
£150,000 a year, Michelle, which I would love to do, and if you earn £6 billion a year, you're paying the same top rate of tax. Now,
that doesn't make sense, though.
Hang on,
it doesn't make sense, does it?
I think it makes perfect sense.
I'd far rather people pay a higher rate of tax when they're earning millions and billions than we watered down the principle of the NHS, which is one, as you said in your introduction, it's a principle of free at the point of delivery. And if we change that now so that wealthier people start paying up front, I can assure you that will become a sliding scale. And as you then said, people who aren't on that much money will start paying when they turn up at their GP service.
Or in turn, if we actually made the tax system make a bit more sense, I agree with Matthew's point, actually, that if you're earning 150k, upwards to billions of pounds, a person earning 150k should not be paying the same amount of tax as someone...
The same rate of tax.
The same rate of tax that earns, like, 3 times that. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I think the pair of you
Why are you sticking up for these billionaires?
I think the
does that make sense,
the People's Channel.
Right.
This is supposed to be the People's Channel, not the billionaires' channel,
Let me ask you a very straightforward question. So if you earn, let's just say, I don't know, 300 grand a year, whatever, £1 million a year, whatever. So the portion above 150, you're already going to lose 45 pence out of every single pound that you make. What do you think you should be losing out of your pound?
It should be progressive, shouldn't it?
To what level?
Should be progressive.
To what level? Where do you stop?
That's something that needs to be thought through seriously so that the effects are commensurate with the pain that you're causing people by taxing them.
You must have thought it through. Would you be happy to take 99 pence of everyone's pound?
I think that would be extreme. But
Where's your cut-off then?
I'd be perfectly happy for someone who's earning £1 billion a year to be paying more than 45%,
to what
45p in the pound.
Give me a point then. To what point?
I don't know. Let's say 70p in the pound.
So you expect... It makes me laugh.
Why are you defending billionaires when people are at food banks?
I think this is a politics of envy. If someone is at a food...
Why?
If someone
We're
is
trying
at
to
a food
redistribute
bank,
money so that we have public services that function, so that people who aren't earning that sort of money get to be seen by a doctor in a reasonable amount of time.
30k a year should be taxed at all.
This is politics of envy.
Not.
Yes, it is.
Lucky them if they want the money. No.
If you think with a straight face that someone is going to go to work to earn £1, only to give 70 pence of that pound over to Rishi Sunak. So what you're saying is...
30% for £1 billion is £300 million.
But
is that not enough?
Is the principle...
When is it enough? When have you got enough money?
Why should you go to work in order to have 70 pence of your pound
we live in a society,
taken off you?
Because we live in a society where there are 7 million people waiting to be seen by the NHS.
And they're not just going to work. It's not like they're in the office, like, earning billions. A lot of that would be other investments that they earn passive income from, which is what's allowed them to be so rich.
I'm more interested in people at food banks.
Personally, for me, I'm also more interested in those who are earning lower income, say 30 grand a year, not really having to pay any tax at all, bar, say, national insurance. I personally just think our tax system doesn't make sense.
But someone on 30 grand a year doesn't pay much tax anyway. You already get your first 12 and a half, whatever it is, for free. And you say about...
But in this current situation, that money off would go a very, very long way, especially, for example, if you're someone that's living in London. I mean, I have friends earning that amount, and for them, it just feels like they're barely taking home any of the money. It doesn't feel fair.